I am so excited to welcome onto our stage, Molly Bloom. Yahoo!
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Hi, JP.
Hi, Molly. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. And I know a lot of people are really excited to kind of hear your story. And in some ways, maybe they know some of the story, but maybe they don't know the backstory. You know, the really difficult moments that they face, you face, I face, where it really does require us to be resilient and reinvent. So I'm excited to dig in. But let's just start, like, you know, in your life, you know, grew up, I think, in Colorado, correct?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Right. And you had a real aspiration to be an Olympic athlete, to be an Olympic skier. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I grew up in a family that loved mogul skiing, and my brothers and I started competing at a very young age. And, you know, we would watch the Olympics every year with our family. And it was, you know, it was a big, huge dream that my brothers and I had. And at 12 years old, I got pretty sidetracked. I got kind of, my life changed. I was diagnosed with really severe scoliosis.
Wow.
Yeah. And the doctors kind of said, look, if you don't get this surgery, you'll become disfigured and over time suffocate to death. And then,
wow.
And then they explained to me how the surgery was going to go down, and how they were going to take this bone from my hip and fuse the top 11 vertebrae together and put 2 metal rods. And, you know, this is sounding worse and worse. And
right.
then I asked the question that I was terrified to ask. I said, what about mogul skiing? And they said, no shot, you know, that's over.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So
well, how did you feel in that moment when you heard that? Because you had a real dream at this point, didn't you?
It was devastating.
Yeah.
I think at 12 years old, and even at, 40 years old, when somebody in that position, an expert, tells you something,
yeah.
you kind of believe it. But luckily, or maybe not luckily.
That's right. That's a good question.
I had already started to have my issues with authority. So
right.
So I decided, and it was interesting because the surgery was not pleasant, but it was not the hard part.
Right.
The hard part was at 12 years old, being asked to stay still for a year.
Wow.
And this was, I couldn't even go to school. I had to just let these bones heal. And this was the dark ages before cell phones and the internet and social media and Netflix.
Right.
Wow. And so what I had, and my family still did their thing. They were skiing and going to school and all this stuff. And
we're doing quite well at it too. Which
oh my God. Yeah.
Helps when you see your brothers doing so well, I suppose, too.
Right. And I had so much time with myself. Solitude. It's not something that generally you are given as a gift or a curse at 12 years old.
Right.
And a lot happened in that year. And pretty early on, I decided I'm going to ski again. But I had so much time to be with my thoughts during that year and to be tapped into my thoughts. And I made this really important discovery that I think we all make at some point in our lives. And that is like, man, my thoughts aren't necessarily my friend, and they're certainly not my ally in pursuing this big dream. And so, like, just sort of instinctively, I realized that I needed to train my mind, that I needed to work on changing this narrative, or at least be able to detach from and not take as fact the processes that are going on with the thinking mind.
Yeah, I think you're so right about that. And for anyone listening, you listeners, me, Molly, all of us, there are times when our thoughts come in and they're crazy. They literally are crazy. And, to not believe every thought we have, that's a huge leap. Like if you left this livecast and that's the one thing you took away, my goodness, that'll change your life. I mean that will change your life. So I love what you're saying, Molly, about that, because many times we just believe it and we believe the next and the next, and it's might be completely irrational, but we're bought in and our behavior is driven by that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had youth on my side at that point, which comes with this sort of like overconfidence and underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, and so you can sort of be more, risk averse. But even as an adult, I had to kind of relearn the lesson. And I remember to the point that you were making, I remember reading this line in a book, The Untethered Soul, which a lot of people
great book.
read. And the line was, "You are not the voice in your head, you're the one that hears it."
Yeah.
And that was like so revolutionary to me, to sort of like reinforce or sort of have like an adult chapter of, okay, I don't necessarily have to listen to these voices in my head. And if you go deeper into neuroscience, what you find out is that the mind is predisposed to be negative because it's been a survival technique that kept us alive during the times where danger was around every corner on the savannah and everything. And as soon as I sort of remember that the brain, the thinking mind, is just a process that's trying to keep us alive and trying to, and it's not like objective, and it's not the truth, and that we can overcome.
Yeah.
And by the way, I've taken that concept too far at times.
Tell me what you mean by that.
I have ignored fear alarm and like, this is a bad idea.
Right.
So, there's that, but finding balance with that, I think, is revolutionary for people.
It is. And I think the one thing about being an athlete, you're on an island. That's how we sometimes talk about it. Like, there's no one else. When you're up at the starting gate, you're on an island, you're by yourself. And that's when you grow in intimacy with your thoughts, with our thoughts. And so I would say to everyone, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we actually do want to challenge ourselves, put ourselves under pressure, because the opportunity for transformation in those moments is vast. Now, you've got to go in with that mindset. We're going to talk about mindset in a little bit with Molly, but this is our greatest opportunity to grow and transform, are those moments. But anyway, so now you're starting to do well as a skier, and you're starting to find your way.
Yeah. So I did, in fact, get back on the mountain, and, I had to relearn how to use my body. And then I had to learn how to use this new body to ski moguls, which is like basically throwing yourself down a mountain with bumps on it, and like, and jumping and whatever. So, but yeah, I mean, I learned how to get uncomfortable, both mentally and physically, and stay that way if necessary. And at 19, I made the US ski team.
Wow, which is a huge, I don't think people realize just what, the kind of the way a pyramid of athletes work to get to a US ski team, to get to a national team,
right,
is a monumental accomplishment that I don't think people realize. They only see people in the Olympics and they didn't get a medal. Like, and I know that's crazy. That's incredible. So at 19, that's amazing.
Yep. And then I made it onto the team as an alternate, because somebody couldn't go, and my family and everyone's like, "Do you think you should go this year?" And I was just, I was like, "What do you mean?"
Exactly. Wow.
Are you insane? And then I ended up placing third overall for the tour. So,
wow.
Just kind of at every step of the way, not only do you have to manage your own internal process, you have to manage everything that's going on externally, and whether or not the world buys into what you're doing or how you're feeling. And I just think like conditioning that interior life, that interior world, is just, it's gotten me, it's saved my life at times,
wow.
But it's certainly enabled me to, take some long shots and get there.
Right. And I think what's clear, and again, we could just stick to the skiing as a metaphor to talk in this whole hour, because the truth is, as there's a whole risk reward piece of how far do you push it, but you've got to manage that being on the edge. But the truth is that for everyone, again, listening, all of our lives, right? We don't want to end this life with regret. 85%, this is a horrible stat, but it's just true. 85% of people, when they come to the end of their life, have a significant regret. I don't want to be one of those people. I think that drives you as well, Molly. And I think, kind of our professional work is to help people get through, understand the brain, understand this operating system so they can be on that edge of find those risks where they can, kind of end their life, so to speak, and feel like I went for it. The worst thing, and this, is to leave an Olympic Games or big competition feeling like you didn't take your shot.
Yeah.
And I come back from, a number of Olympic Games, one in particular where we felt that as a team. And I think to myself, that's an analog for our lives. I don't want to come to the end of my life, and I don't want to have the impact on people where we don't help them find their way so they don't leave not having taken their shots. And I think, that's part of your life story, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And I think that there's this misconception that people that accomplish big things sort of have this preliminary foundational mindset and mental strength.
Yeah.
And that's totally not the case. I mean, for me, like, I was an extraordinarily anxious child. I have had I've struggled in a lot of ways, which is why I think ultimately that, at a time in my life, I turned to alcohol and drugs. I became like a drug addict, and that also I'm so lazy. If I don't keep myself disciplined, I could literally sit on that couch for 5 days and watch Netflix. That's the basis of who I am. And so something I feel really compelled to talk about and go through these experiences and talk about what I learned is you don't have to end the way you came in.
Yeah.
And it's not just oh, there's a certain type of person that is cut out for this kind of life. And by the way, whatever your Everest is, some days in my life, my Everest has been to get out of bed, honestly, and it doesn't need to be the Olympics or Harvard or whatever.
Right.
Everybody, has to live a life true and according to who they are, but they don't have to live a life with the base model operating system that they come in with. And I know that for sure.
Yeah.
And I didn't always know that,
Yeah. Yeah. It's important for people to hear that just because you got to these levels of success, and you did. And there's a lot of other people on the front of, Forbes or Fortune magazine or wherever. We think, oh, their life, they were preordained. They had some brain or whatever it was that put them in a better position, predisposed. Absolutely not the case.
No.
And in fact, I think for all of us to know that, little by little, bit by bit, we can change and grow our brain. We know that from neuroscience, as I know you know. And so the real question is what are we intentionally doing every day? And we're not going to have great days, but just to keep moving that forward so our brain does evolve. It just is evolving. In this moment, just from the moments you and I are having right now, from people watching, all of our brains are changing. They change every moment of every day. So then it's okay, well, what are we doing to change it in a way that leads to whatever is our Everest? I love the way you say that.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that. So now but you had an accident. Tell us about that. And then, I think went into school, but just tell us that story because that was a real setback, obviously, real, hit to your dream.
It was. And it's almost humorous how metaphorical it was. And I'll tell you what I mean. So I made it to the Olympic qualifiers that year. I made it to the U.S. Nationals, and that was an Olympic qualifier year. So I'm sitting there at the Olympic qualifiers. I'm skiing better than I've ever skied in my life. I have completely proven everyone wrong, coaches, parents, whatever. And I'm so hyped for this moment, and I'm so grateful in this moment, and I'm skiing so well. And then I skied over this tiny little stick in the course, this tiny piece of pine bough that they use when the light's flat in moguls to show you depth perception. And how many times have I skied over these things? And it lodged itself in between my boot and my binding, and my ski pre-released in the air. And I fell really hard. And, the doctors were like, you're playing Russian roulette here. You've got a spine full of metal. And it was that compounded with, do I have another 4 years in me?
Yeah. I get it. I get it. Wow. How did you feel in that moment? Like thinking, gosh,
I was so devastated.
yeah,
I
yeah,
was so devastated, but mainly because still at that point in my life, I thought that I would not be okay if I didn't have an
yeah,
Olympic gold medal.
yeah,
You know, I thought that that was it. That it was either, it was so narrow. It was either you get an Olympic gold medal and your parents recognize that you are as good as your brother, you know, like, because I grew up with a super high achieving family and my brother literally is a sports prodigy. You know, he was like #1 in the world as a young kid. And so, you know, I just had this conception that you either do this or your life is not worth living, which
wow.
is of course so narrow, and you get over that, but
But we don't know that, do we?
no,
And,
no,
and
you're
like for
so in it.
everyone listening right now, we think, oh, unless I get that job or I get into
Mhm,
that school or whatever it is, we think our
mhm,
life will end. It's so
mhm.
binary. And
It's
again,
so
this,
binary.
this is the
Mhm.
brain again, all right? And it's doing that
Yeah,
because it thinks it's been told some stories and it thinks this is what it means to be successful so that people will like us and love us, quite frankly.
right, which is at the base of it all.
Absolutely. And yet
Yeah.
it's a story I think we all need to kind of dig into and say, is that really true? And of course it's not, but we don't always know that, which is
Right.
why, I mean, your story, and I love how you've really done the work. So you sit there and you recognize what was really driving, at least from what I, understand talking to you. And that's a real service, to be honest, because a lot of times, I interact with a lot of athletes and they don't really get it, to be honest. And
Mhm.
I don't want to be too negative here, but it's just, this is the work. We all have our work, and I feel like you've done it in that way, and that means that you can now express and communicate in a way that I think really lands for audiences in your keynote speaking and everything else you do.
Well, I mean, having a shrink for a dad helps.
Yeah, that's right. That didn't
You don't
hurt.
really have a choice.
That's right.
You're going to process.
It's all a process.
Yeah.
I get it. Wow. So then you kind of became a student. You,
I was in school.
yeah.
I was finishing my undergrad. I managed to sort of do undergrad while I was skiing for the team.
Okay.
And I had about 5 classes left. And I couldn't shake it. You know?
Mm,
I couldn't shake it. I sat in the classroom at the University of Colorado. I looked at those mountains. I had not established like a real life in
right.
Boulder, like a
Right.
college life. My whole life was skiing. And so I decided I was just going to take a year off just to kind of, exercise that geographical solution that we always try to throw at problems.
Run away, baby.
Run away. Right. That's exactly right. I can't handle this. I'm going to run. And so, I decided I'm going to go somewhere warm where it's like the other side of, might as well be the other, end of the world
Sure, of
from
course.
local skiing. So, I drove my car to Los Angeles.
Makes sense. On one level, makes sense.
And I had to get a job. I had to get a couple jobs because this little small town Loveland girl had no idea the cost of living in Beverly Hills. So I was like waitressing everywhere and got a job as a personal assistant for this guy that was very successful, very rich, very connected, and
Mm,
a total jerk.
mm,
And I'd never seen a creature like this before.
wow.
you know and a lot of people ask me like, why'd you stay working for him? And I guess I was curious. I was seeing this other world
Right.
that I'd never been exposed to, and I could tell that I was growing in terms of like I had to be so rational, and I was learning about deals, and I was learning about finance, and also I was competitive, so I was like, you can't scare me away.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
And after working for him for some time, I'll never forget this. He comes into the office and he's like, I need you to try to look halfway decent tonight and serve drinks at my poker game. I talk about this a lot. And so I like to try to, show up and be good
course.
at what I'm doing, even if I have no idea. So like I was Googling things like, what kind of music do poker players like to
Of
listen
course.
to? What do they eat?
Yeah.
Who are these people? And so like I made this really, I'm 23, 24 at the time. So I made this really embarrassing playlist with songs like The Gambler on it. Hey
Of
Rogers,
course.
right?
Of course.
And I went and got this like, run of the mill, like cheese plate. And I show up to this game and all of a sudden the players started to show up and it was like Ben Affleck and one of the the owner of one of the biggest investment banks in the world and a politician who will forever remain unnamed, and like one after another, Leo DiCaprio, these people that move the needle on the world stage. And I'm like, super mortified about my playlist and my
Of course. Of course.
my
Not
like
worthy. Not
cheddar
worthy.
cheese plate, but but as the night wore on, I got to be a fly on the wall in this.
Yeah.
I'm a small town girl, like having access to this. And in the beginning for me, it was, I'm going to be really honest, they were handing me $500 chips for refilling Diet Cokes. So that was compelling.
Of
But
course.
as compelling is the information that you're learning, to be and the network that you're building. Yeah. And so, I wanted to stay in this room. And then after a couple of weeks, months, I'm like, I don't just want to stay in this room. I want to own this room.
Wow.
By
the way, that's pretty amazing that it was that short a time, which does say something about your mindset in terms of a certain belief you have in yourself. Like, why not me? Why can't I do this? I imagine. Is that somewhat true?
Yeah, it is. And I think, again, like sometimes it's a lot easier to have that belief in yourself when you're younger, when you're just starting out.
Right.
But it's so important to continually cultivate that.
Yeah.
And like, there's real data behind that with, the Carol Dweck's work with growth mindset, where she goes into the Bronx to these underperforming schools and these kids are, this one in particular that I love. And it's just such a great story. She goes in and these kids are scoring at the bottom of the heap in the math districts,
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that she changes about their curriculum is she goes in and she says, listen, you're just not good at math yet,
Yeah. Wow.
And she teaches them about what's happening in their brain while they're exerting effort. You exert effort, there's stored energy, then the neurons connect, and then you get smarter. And then at the end of that year, all those kids scored number one in their math districts. And that's the only thing that was changed about their education. And to me, that's indisputable proof that believing in yourself is not just motivational woo-woo bullcrap.
Yeah.
It's actually quantifiable as a tool and a technique. And like what we know about the brain is that you can cultivate that mindset. And we can get into that a bit, like in terms of techniques, but yeah, believing in yourself, I mean, it is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. In some ways, the kind of the motivational speakers world at times can feel a bit woo-woo, can feel a bit fluffy and not very substantive. Yeah. And Carol's work, I think, is so clear.
So clear.
That and I mean, I know you know this, but for anyone listening, like Carol Dweck's a seminal figure in psychology around personal difference. Like she is truly one of the giants. And so, there's a number of studies that now have shown exactly what Molly's talking about, that, every exerted effort and just that process leads to us being a little bit better, little by little, bit by bit. And so, however our better is, but certainly in terms of the effect on our brain. So, well, let's just take a little bit of a sidetrack around, you mentioned some techniques, because I think we all still want to continue with the story, but, in a sense, like, we all have an aspiration to do well, but we hit our setbacks, like you have, like I have, like we all have. And it's like, we need a plan. What are some of those techniques that you've found to be like, wow, really powerful in terms of helping us kind of do something concrete to make a difference?
Yeah. So again, like I kind of always like I like to do things that have some scientific or some data validity. You know, there are things out there that I think probably work that there just haven't been longitudinal studies, but I'm just kind of like, I'm very particular about how I extend my resources, and like, I have to have some bumpers. So
Sure.
what I try to look for are things that aren't just an experiment of one, meaning there's
Right.
just one person who's telling you this based on their own experience, because we know
Yeah.
that's a bad experiment, you know? So I found these things, which are not revolutionary. They're things that we've all heard before. But when I was in the worst mindset of my life, which was after everything fell apart, and I don't want to bury the lead, but we'll get there. But, you know, I realized that, like, okay, the things that I've been doing in the past, which is just sort of like being conscious of the thought process, and aren't working anymore. And so what I found is an informal practice of mindfulness and a formal practice of meditation. And before, like, your brains tune out, because we've heard these words so many times, and like, it's so hard to sort of like suss out, what does that exactly mean? But the type of meditation that I practice is basically, you're just training your brain to focus on what you want to focus on instead of the thinking mind. And as soon as you start to have agency over where you place your focus and your awareness, like, let's look at an example. The thinking mind goes, you know, you're starting a new project. The thinking mind goes, you're never going to do this. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to work. And if you have the ability, because you've trained yourself to shift out of that and either disregard that or you know, shift to a better place, that's super powerful. Everything starts with the mind, you know? And so what I did is, and I kept reading, and I kept looking at scientific papers that said meditation and mindfulness. And I was like getting irritated, because I was like, there's no way I can do that. You know, I have a really like fast mind, and like, I don't like to be bored. And like, I just kept getting so annoyed and searching for more answers and more answers. And finally I was like, there was enough convergent validity that I was like, I've got to try this.
Yeah.
So I started super, super, super small. The first day I did it for 30 seconds.
Wow.
And then the next day for a minute.
Yep.
And then, you know, I built up to the 20 minutes or whatever. And what I did was, you know, there's all different kinds of meditation, but in terms of like, what I did is I focused on the breath, which is in the present moment, right?
Sure.
That brings you into the present moment. And when the mind starts quacking, which it does, you just refocus on the breath. So you're training your focus.
Yeah.
And then the informal practice of mindfulness is just to practice that throughout the day.
Right.
Just doing what you can to get out of the thinking mind and get yourself into the present moment, because we know that when the brain is focused on something in the present moment, you don't have that default mode network worrying about the future, fretting about the past, you know? And that's where peace is, that's where agency is, and that's where you can really start, I think, to exert so much more control over your life and your behavior.
Yeah. Wow. And so for anyone listening, you know, to start a practice in mindfulness, it's like going to the gym, but for your brain as opposed to the body, right? And it builds, you know, neural pathways, which is what allows you during the day outside of the gym, so to speak, to have, as Molly's describing, the ability to be present, to also know that we don't know what's going to happen an hour from now, let alone a month from now. So for us to kind of future trip doesn't serve us. And mindfulness, if nothing else, just allows us to see, oh, I'm going off on a story. Or as you said, that default mode network, we're, you know, ruminating about the past, worried about the future, or that other big one, social comparison.
Oh yeah.
Which is another big one of the DMN that we have to be really careful about, because
Totally.
we are sitting there like, you know, me with my family, or my, you know, peers, you with your brothers and your peers, and all the way up. And we're engaged. I want everyone to really understand this. We're engaged in a lot of impression management, mainly to make ourselves feel better, because we want to be viewed nicely by others. We want to be respected, loved, as you mentioned earlier, Molly, by others. And if we can just catch that, and you said it well, just to notice that, then it becomes less of a drive. it loses some of its power. And for us just to befriend those thoughts, just to say, oh, you're back again.
Yeah.
So one of the things we say with athletes when we're feeling our body, when all of this is happening, the reframe for us is, oh, this is my body getting ready to perform. That's all. And that's great. And then all of a sudden you welcome it. You don't fight it, push it away, which, you know, we can get so consumed by pushing, not wanting to feel uncomfortable. Mindfulness can sometimes be just, can we sit with being a little less comfortable for a moment without reacting?
For sure. And, you know, like when you start your day with a meditation practice and you start your day sitting with all the crap that's going on in your head and sitting there like, you know, like a warrior with it all and letting it all be, and, you know, sort of asserting yourself as someone who's willing to get a bit uncomfortable. You know, that for me, it sets up the whole rest of the day. And I'm not saying I have good days all the time. By the way, I'm not saying I have good meditations all the time. Like most of the time, it does not feel like I'm sort of zenned out. It feels like work.
Yeah.
But the changes are, I mean, the reason that I started meditating is because I was in crisis. The reason that I religiously meditate every single day that I can, and that's usually 7 days a week, is because it changed me. Yeah. That's a great, and just one final point before we push on, because we've got so much I know we can talk about. I want people to really recognize, and this is part of Molly's message, is like meditation and mindfulness is not just to make us feel calm. That might be an outcome at times, but it's actually to change our relationship with whatever's happening in the moment, whatever, you know, physical sensation we're experiencing, emotion or thought, that voice in our head. Can we just sit there and be with it without getting driven by it? And just that pause, it's so powerful, which is, I think, you know, what I'm hearing from you. And I think that's doable, because I think sometimes people think, and you just said this, it's not like we're in a, you know, those who meditate, you know, are always in a Zen state, like they're completely, you know, imperturbable. No, that's not it at all. No. They have ups and downs like you and I do, and they just have a little more ease, a different relationship with it. And that's real, that's where the wisdom comes out of that practice. Yeah. And, you know, just one more thing I'll say is there's a really compelling research done by Sarah Lazar at Harvard. And she ran this experiment with a control group of non-meditate, you know, people that didn't meditate and people that did. And these were first-time meditators. So they ran fMRI brain scans of these people. And then they had them engage in an 8-week course of mindfulness meditation. And then they reran the scans. And what they saw was an increase in volume in the participants' prefrontal cortex, which we know is responsible for emotional regulation and problem solving. And they saw a decrease in gray matter or volume in the amygdala, which is the fear center, which is the worry center and anxiety center. So I think that's something that's so exciting. And I've definitely felt in my life is that through this practice, you change your brain, just like through a practice of yoga, you change your body. It's not like this thing that you're doing just for the moment, which I think is a huge misconception. I'm doing this to find peace right now. Right. That's not how it works. Right. You're actually training your brain to be more peaceful, to be more rational, to be less emotionally driven, to be less fear driven. And you can change the way that your brain fires like that. And for me in my life, who I've been a bit tortured by my mind for a really long time until I really leaned into these practices, I just didn't know there was a different way. That's why I sought out alcohol or drugs or success or dating or shopping or whatever it was. Like, I did not know that there was a different way. I did not know that I could feel a different way in the world, that I could relate differently to the world. That is like, I know everyone's going to be moved by that. That's amazing, Molly. And just so everyone knows, it's, you know, in Sarah Lazar's work, 10 minutes a day was all they studied. 10 minutes a day. Think about that. It's not inaccessible, right? For anyone listening. And so that is the message too. It's not like you got to do an hour a day, which is too big of a barrier for most people. No, 10 minutes. I've never in my life done an hour. Yeah. And I did see one thing in the chat touting Headspace, and I couldn't agree more. I think it's a great way to learn this practice. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So now you had a bit of a challenge where, you know, tell us where you're coming back to the story. You know, you had a bit of a challenge with this gentleman.
maybe I shouldn't call him gentle, but
he was not a
man.
gentleman. Yeah. So first thing, I was making a lot of money running these games, and my first go-to, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was learning about poker. I was learning about, I was trying to learn about like accounting and, sort of in preparation for what I hoped would be my own games. But what I really focused on is what my mom taught me to do, is show up, be kind, be honest, go above and beyond for people,
Wow.
and like, that's what I focused on. And juxtaposed with him, he was just a jerk,
Yep.
at the poker table and everyone knew it. And so, I'm pretty loyal. I was then, and I am now, but, so he basically said, "You're making so much money at the poker game, I'm going to stop paying you for, working but you're still going to have to come into the office every day and work as my personal assistant." And I was like, okay, well, I am making a lot of money at this poker game. I'm making a lot of connections. I guess I'll do that. And then, as he saw me cultivating these real relationships with the players, because I was a nice person.
Of course.
That's it. I wasn't, trying to be like a hustler.
Yep.
I was just.
So this is not a high bar.
No, it's not a high bar, right? And I was getting to know these people, and he sort of, I think, felt in possession of me, right? Like, this is my girl. Like, I brought her, and so he said, "I'm taking the poker game away from you." And so at that point, I believed that I had exercised my loyalty as far as my loyalty could go.
Yep.
And I planned a game for the next week.
Wow.
And invited all the players except for him. And man, I didn't think this was going to work. I didn't even think anyone was really going to show up, because this is like I was like 24-year-old girl going up against this guy, scary guy from the Billionaire Boys Club,
Yep. Yep.
And I always talk about, like, once I had the game, I got much more business savvy, and I learned how to be an entrepreneur. But the way that I got the game was by being a nice person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and when you think of, what influences people's decision? Well, when they're making a buying decision, people buy people, ideas, then product, not the other way around. We think it's product or ideas and we have to have some status. No, they're buying us. Can they connect with us? Right. Do we tune into them?
Right.
And the whole point, and I think this is a great way to connect what we've talked about so far, your ability to kind of manage your brain a little bit, not saying that we're all perfect, but just a little bit, be able to show up as your best self means that people can connect more with you. And so that's why we want to do that other work, because in anything, any influence we want to have, working on a team, being a manager or leader, that counts. When people feel psychologically safe with us, all of a sudden we ask them, "Hey, do you want to come to my game?" They'll take that risk with us, which is really what you did, but what they did as well.
Right.
Wow. Well, good for you. Yahoo. So you ran that game for a while.
I ran that game for 6 years.
Wow. 6 years in LA before you went to New York?
In LA. And
right.
I was making crazy money.
Wow.
I really went from like making no money to making crazy money.
Yeah.
Which was its own journey.
Right. And I imagine, if we kind of just fast forward to New York, that's where you did have a bit of a reckoning, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
I had a huge reckoning. Well, I lost the game in LA in this really unjust and unfair way. And the plan always was get in, make a bunch of money, make these great connections, and then go do something more legitimate with it.
Right.
The plan was never to run poker games for 8 years.
Yeah.
Right. So at that point, it would have been a great time to just bow out. But the pride, I was pissed and I had something to prove. So I went to New York City in 2008, the worst economy.
Right. Of course.
One of the worst economies we've ever seen.
Sure.
Not knowing anyone and just fueled by like anger and the need to like prove myself again. I ended up building the biggest poker game at that time in the world, which was a $250,000 buy-in, but also really building an empire.
Yeah. Wow.
Like I had I monopolized New York City poker in a very short amount of time, which ended up being very dangerous. But so, there was a lot of things that happened in New York, and it was probably the biggest business triumph in my life at that time. But then something changed. Something fundamentally changed in me. And I would say up until this point, like I said, my mom really raised us to be nice people, to lead with integrity, to think about others, think about how you can, show up for other people. And I stopped living that way. Like I stopped worshiping a set of principles and started worshiping money, success, power, and it was never enough. And as soon as I stopped leading with integrity and with, in prioritizing that type of life, things started to fall apart very quickly and very intensely.
Wow.
And so I'm scaling this thing, which is really tough to scale with one person.
Sure, of course.
And I'm also now acting as the bank, because that's the way that I disrupted the New York market, by realizing that people are always getting stiffed. And if I could become the bank, then I could really go in and sort of undercut.
Right.
And so, but I was being led by greed. So I had so many games and wasn't being as careful who I put in the seats, wasn't careful as to whose toes I was stepping on in terms of other games. And I ran into some huge issues. Couple guys who were running a huge crime syndicate and were like associated with the Russian mob started playing my games. Then the Italian mob came to me and said, look, great what you've been able to build. This is kind of our deal, and wanted me to partner with them. I ended up turning that down and sent someone to my house. They put a gun in my mouth. They threatened my family. They threatened me.
My God.
Beat the hell out of me. And then, ended up doing something that up until this point, I'm doing it legally, believe it or not. And the thing that was sort of keeping it legal is that I wasn't taking a rake, meaning a percentage of every pot.
Right.
But like I said, I was getting reckless and greedy. And so I started doing that. There was a confidential informant in the game. At that time, 2011, the feds seized all my assets, every penny I ever made, every piece of property.
Wow.
And then 2 years later, 17 FBI agents came to my apartment in the middle of the night, arrested me at gunpoint, put a piece of paper in front of me that said the United States of America versus Molly Bloom. And
the US is big.
You do not want to be.
No, like it must feel so overwhelming to see the United States. It's like, oh my gosh.
Like Molly Bloom versus the United States of America. I wonder who's going to win.
Wow.
And by the way, they have all your money.
So, yeah. Wow.
But, I got an attorney, and I didn't have enough money to even retain an attorney, let alone fight it.
Yeah.
So we started working together, and, I'll never forget this moment. I walked into Jim Walden's office, and that's the attorney. And I was like, all right, Walden, what's our angle and what's our strategy? Cause I'm like fresh off the gambling scene, whatever. And he's like, Molly, listen, integrity is going to be our angle and our strategy. And that just hit me like,
wow,
because I knew that was like who I wanted to be again.
That's the winning strategy that fit with you, and you could play that. You could, I don't want to say play that game, because that plays with words that doesn't make sense, but you could buy into that and live that, couldn't you?
Yeah, that was who I wanted to be as a young girl. That's we're talking about not having regrets at the end of your life. Those are the regrets that I didn't want to have, because that's what really matters. It's like how you showed up and who you were and the decisions you made. And, so anyway, so I was like, I'm back in on this.
Yeah.
Back in on integrity, and then the world, as it does, tested me like pretty soon after that to see like, how serious I was
Yeah,
about it,
yeah.
you know?
Easy to say, harder to do.
Right. So the prosecutors, this is the Southern District of New York.
Wow. SDNY, which we're all finding out about because of what's going on with Trump, of course, now, and
Right.
others. But they are, for people who don't know, they are kind of, in terms of brand, they are probably the biggest, baddest, in a sense, the toughest brand going in the US. Isn't that fair to say?
Yeah. And they love a flashy indictment.
Of course. Yeah, that's right. Because they all have political aspirations.
Right. Right. So anyway, I went in and talked to them and they said, look, you have run one of the biggest underground high stakes gambling syndicates ever.
Wow.
And what's very interesting about your business is that you had these politicians and celebrities and sports stars and Wall Street people that played, and we want information on them. We want to know what they're up to. And we believe that you have some of that information. And they were right. This wasn't just gossip. I knew stuff, right?
Of course.
Listen, if I would have had a Harvey Weinstein or a Jeffrey Epstein in my game, I would have handed them over, no problem. But these are people that are doing things sort of similar to what I'm doing. So like, it didn't. I wasn't covering for pedophiles or for rapes, right?
I get it.
So, they said, if you're willing to become a confidential informant, wear a wire. If we need you to hand over all your hard drives, we'll give you all your money back. We'll make sure you don't go to jail. But if you don't, we think your crimes deserve some real jail time.
Wow. Gosh, the US against Molly Bloom. Like that was a really tough talk. One of the things we talk about in our work is this idea of a last 8% situation. A situation, it could be a conversation or a decision that's harder than the usual ones we face in the course of a day, a week, a month, a lifetime. This to me is a last 8% decision.
Yeah.
What do I do? And that and a lot of people, we all do. We struggle with these. So tell us a little bit about the process, so to speak, of going through that. Wow, because there's fear involved. And by the way, some folks have asked, how do you deal with fear? So that's talk about that, because that must have been just, wow.
Yeah, it was wow. Well, I'll tell you what, I had gotten sober. And anyone who's been through a 12-step program, there's a lot of self-inventory you do. There's a lot of investigation that you do. And there's a lot of clearing out the wreckage of the past and saying sorry when you need to say sorry, and really looking at yourself in a very honest way. And so in the spirit of that, what I had to admit and what the glaring truth was that this whole thing was my fault.
So take your responsibility.
Yeah.
Everyone listening, as hard as it is, there's something really clean about taking responsibility, isn't there?
There is.
Yeah.
There absolutely is. And so, the thought of turning around and stepping on people to try to get out of the trouble that I had caused, I couldn't reconcile that.
Yeah.
So I told the prosecutors. They were very unhappy.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And I waited to get sentenced.
Wow.
And
how did you feel when you're waiting? How long were you waiting? A week, a month? What was?
A year.
A year? Oh my gosh.
A year. Well, if I'm being honest, I didn't stay sober.
Yeah, I can imagine that must have been so challenging. Wow.
Mm-hmm. So I would love to tell you that I just faced it with full-blown courage, but that's not the story.
Yeah.
I had a rough year, and it was scary, and and then I got sentenced, and I got a judge that was pretty liberal and lenient, and said, look, I don't agree with what you've done here, but I'm not going to send you to prison.
Wow.
Yeah. And then here we are, right?
Yeah.
35 years old. I've got a brother who, two-time Olympian, NFL football player, started a charity for senior citizens, raised $80 million for a startup. I got another brother who is cardiothoracic surgeon, Harvard educated, Harvard trained. And I'm
Mass General.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm 35 years old. I'm a convicted felon. I've got millions of dollars in debt. My network's decimated and my reputation has been dragged through the mud in the tabloids. And you have a choice, right? You always have a choice.
Yeah. That's it, isn't it? And it's almost like that's a through line through all of this. The need to be resilient, but also reinvent. That's what I'm hearing. Is that fair to say? And you speak so well to that. Talk to us about that, because I think all of us, with 2020, with the pandemic, with the political situation, with so much uncertainty and challenge, we've all had to kind of be resilient and then at times reinvent our businesses, our jobs, our roles, our relationship with the people now who we're living with in a very, much more intimate and intense way. Talk about reinvention, because I think that's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah. So for me, the most significant things that I did in order to set up a reinvention was I had to forgive myself.
Wow.
I had to forgive myself. And I had to, I was in this position now, which was my worst nightmare. Humiliated, not the whole world, but it feels like the whole world,
Yeah, for sure.
The truth is that the whole world's not listening to you or looking at you or thinking about you.
We think so, but they're not.
Right. It feels that way.
Yeah.
But in my universe, everybody knew that I failed spectacularly and was humiliated, And I think that was one of my biggest fears, but here I was and I was still living. And in some ways it was liberating. I think what I needed to do to forgive myself was I needed to return to decency and integrity, for sure.
Yeah.
Know that I had done whatever I could to learn the lesson, pick myself up, fix what I could fix. And then the thing is, love yourself anyway.
Yeah.
Forgive yourself, let it go, and come up with a new plan. And I think preparation for a reinvention is a great antidote to the anxiety of reinvention.
Yeah. Molly, I'm not sure if you're as part of your mindfulness practice, you've played with loving kindness at all. Are you familiar with loving kindness? For anyone who's listening, there's an actual great practice. Mm-hmm. And it's like a tenderness towards ourselves and then towards others.
And towards
practice.
Others, yeah.
And that can be real, when I hear what you're describing, as a real concrete step, because I think all of us are our worst enemies. We do believe that voice in our head, that critic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for us to both see it, befriend it, just let it be, not get taken by it. And also to then have some compassion for ourselves. I think that's what I'm hearing you say. And that's
absolutely
practice. Again, it's something everyone can do. It's not like, some people can do it, some can't. Some are religious, it's not about any of that. It's, you could start tomorrow. You could start today.
Yeah. Is that no, because I promise you, in that moment where I was a convicted felon, I had humiliated myself and my family. I was broke. I was a drug addict. I promise you, I couldn't have hated myself more.
Yeah.
But there was a really clear direction that I had intuitively that I gotta figure this out, because what's the point of going through the rest of my life hating myself, blaming myself? It's not going to get me anywhere. That doesn't mean that I shouldn't take responsibility for my actions, try to right the wrongs, try to figure it out. But then at the end of the day, all right, you know, that's it. You're human. You make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was so funny because then I went into the preparation stage, which is do as much research as I can, ask as many questions as I can, try to figure out the way forward, the way through, and then attack, even the days where and for me, I was the monetizable asset here, or the asset that can sort of reinvent my life and my brand, is the story. I believe that, right? You've seen the story a lot, gambling rings, everything run by men, but not very often by women. So I was there's a uniqueness to the story.
Right.
And so I decided I was going to write a book, and then I was going to get Aaron Sorkin to write the movie.
Did you really think that at the time?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Because I'm such a big Aaron Sorkin fan that you even
Me too. He's my
thought
favorite
that.
writer.
I'm like, oh my God.
So like if you're going to give your life rights to someone,
he's the guy.
It better be someone serious, right?
That's right.
And I had a short list to be fair, but Aaron was on the top of my short list. And so I just started, working my network that I didn't have anymore. And like most people don't answer the phone, they're scared, but I kept going at it. And finally I got to Aaron, and I'll never forget, I had this, I flew to LA, and I walk into the Soho House feeling like Hester Prynne with the, because you're marked in that world. You're marked. It's the Soho House. I know everyone there. I'm walking in from the dead, but I just remember being okay in my skin, because I had done the work, and got sober again, and I'm still sober, this time it's stuck.
Good for you.
Thanks. And walking into that thing, and here's the great Aaron Sorkin, and I tell him my story, and when I'm done, he just has this super amused look on his face, and he's like, well, I'll tell you one thing, kid. I've never met someone so down on their luck and so full of themselves.
Oh, what a line. By the way, of course that's from him. He's got all the lines.
He's got all the lines.
Wow.
And of course I wasn't full of myself, but what it translated to me was I had forgiven myself.
Yeah.
And I was no longer self-flagellating, and I could walk into the Soho House with my head held high, look someone in the eyes, tell them my story. Was I living with my mom? Yeah. Did I have a bank account? No. Did I have a car? No. But I had I knew who I was, and I knew where I was going, and the rest is history.
Possible, isn't it? I think for everyone, as we're kind of coming towards the end, for everyone to recognize, as bad as that was, and it was a year awaiting sentence, a gun, and on, as bad as all of that was, you could still, with doing the work and doing a practice, it just doesn't come out like that. You can get to the place where you show up without the residue of that. Because I think sometimes we walk into a moment and we have all this stuff, oh, you're not good enough, imposter, whatever it is. And we don't show up as effectively as we can. And the person's reading that, not the other stuff which they can't read, of course.
Right.
So for us to do the work means we can show up and just say, here I am. What's unique about me? You've already shared, your story, your, network in a sense, but all that learning. And you're like, hey, and I'm sure he was drawn by, it's a great story, of course, but drawn by that too. Right. So and by the way, that's what you've gone on to do with all of your speaking and all of your great work, right? You've reinvented again, really, this story, because this is just not the content of your story is a common story, but the process of just the heartache and the difficulty and the doubt, and that there's a plan which you have realized. And I know you're not perfect. No one is, but you've realized to get to this point where I think you're pretty, I'm guessing you can tell us, pretty happy, pretty purposeful in what you're doing now.
I am. But that's not to say that I don't do work every single day.
Here.
And if I don't do work every single day, I can get really quickly back into that mind that thinks that I need more, I want more.
Right.
It's not enough.
Right.
I'm not pretty. I'm not smart. I'm not enough. Both ends of the coin.
Comparing mind.
Yeah. Like the insecure egomaniac,
Yeah, for sure.
that is something that, I got to take my medicine.
Yeah.
And so if I don't stay consistent with that, I'll get right back there and I'll be miserable again.
Yeah. There's so many things to take out of this conversation. I'm so grateful for the conversation, but there's a bunch of questions, and this has been such a great conversation. I didn't want to interrupt you, but as you sit here and you think that people are dealing with fear and challenges,
Mhm.
what would be your kind of parting, so to speak, summary of like, here's maybe where you might want to focus if you're facing some of these challenges, and we all are with what's going on with pandemic and uncertainty, et cetera.
Yeah. Um, well, I think the first thing that I would suggest is uh, to become a seeker of solutions.
Hmm.
Because the truth is that we don't have to just deal with the way that our mind processes things, or the difficulty with emotions, or the fear, or whatever. So to become a seeker of solutions is the best way you're going to find whatever works for you.
Hmm.
I would recommend to every single person on the planet a meditation practice.
Sure.
It has changed my brain and my nervous system tremendously. And then there are also a lot of insanely great books and techniques on how to deal with fear, on how to deal with emotions. If I just have to pull the two, like sort of that work the best for me, is to get used to having the emotion, having the fear, having the discomfort, and not reacting to it in the normal ways that we do: fight, flight, numb, whatever. When I started to sit with discomfort instead of trying to numb it or run from it, it was a game changer.
Wow.
There's insanely cool things you can do with the breath to help you sit with those hard things. And I think that's the first step is stop running, stop trying to change it,
Yeah.
make, sit with it. And then there are ways that you can, with your mind, like surrender it,
Yeah.
and just relax to it. And as soon as you're able to start to sit with these things that we're so scared of, I was so scared of, sometimes I'm still so scared of,
For sure.
that is was the beginning of true inner power for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And freedom from all of that stuff. Hey.
And freedom, not
Yeah.
total freedom, right?
No,
Because
of course.
we experience it, but it's like, it's so different. It's like when I see my dog who just got an operation, she has the pain, right? And it's minorly annoying to her, but she's not doing this. Oh my God, I'm in so much pain. How much longer is it going to last? I can't do everything I want to do. Like she's not throwing the gasoline on it.
Yeah.
She's just feeling it.
Yeah.
And whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah. You know what I love about this part of what you're saying is, if we take as a truth, which I happen to, that everyone is suffering. I mean, everyone.
Yeah.
And you've worked with, you've met some of these famous people. I've worked with, people who are kind of highly accomplished. They're all suffering. They all have this voice in their head. Absolutely. Including you.
No
And
doubt.
you have that. We all do. But what's interesting from my perspective is, if we take that as a truth that everyone's suffering, if we can be not perfect, but a little bit better in terms of managing our stuff, it means we can really be of service to those who need us to be of service to them.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's
Absolutely.
actually real power too, in a positive way, that we can sit there and have a bit of empathy, show up as that calm person in the boat, and really be able to influence them in a way where they start to go, wow, what are you doing? And through our modeling, not that we're perfect, but that, to me, I sometimes think that's one of the reasons to practice, is because the world is suffering. If we can be an antidote, wow.
Well, we did. Yeah.
Yahoo.
I couldn't agree with you more, JP. And we didn't really get into service. And it's, I think, something that I know is hugely important to you, and certainly important to me, and I consider part of the medicine. But I think the goal, if you see like human beings on a spectrum, the ones that are completely, wholly self-interested, that's mental illness, right?
Yep.
And then, over here you have your Mother Teresa's and whatever is like completely about other people.
Yeah.
The common denominator in happy people that I've seen in my life are somewhere on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Right. And like I expected to go into those worlds that I was in with these people who have everything.
Yeah.
And to see contentment and joy and appreciation and gratitude. And the only ones that were okay meaning the only ones that were truly enjoying their life and had found fulfillment and peace, and I can count on this hand, are the ones that use their life and their resources in some way to help other people.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's not, there's no like deviation from that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's a real cycle too. As soon as we can just let, feel what we're feeling, just step beside it and serve someone else in a very small way, we get a little upward jolt. And then we start to see that. And sometimes people never get to that point of, wow, a little bit of service and look at the return.
Yeah.
Almost,
so
which is then becomes a virtuous cycle up. And it's almost like, goodness, that's part of it. And if you're a manager at work or a leader, absolutely. When you're at home with the people you influence, absolutely. And so I think that can be such a motivation, to practice, because I think sometimes my experience in kind of teaching people mindfulness is that they're like, oh, I can't follow my breath. I'm not getting in. I'm not calm. Am I doing it wrong? And they kind of give up. And to me, for people to understand this whole practice is about growing wisdom and growing compassion. And there's, real practices for each. All of a sudden, it's not about, sitting down and I'm practicing to calm my mind or whatever. There's something bigger, and it is to serve others. That can be such kind of a, real motivation, a real, well, it truly is just motivation, but it's a juice that can drive us. Because sometimes it's like, why am I doing this? Like, it's not even helping me. And, I think that can get in the way sometimes for people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't sit down and start meditating because I wanted to help other people. I did it because I wanted to help myself.
Sure.
But where I got to was this place where I felt empathy and compassion for people on such a deep and new level that I felt compelled to dedicate a big part of my life to helping other people and to imparting the things that have been taught to me.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Molly, I can tell you right now that the people listening in on this have been served by you, honestly. And I'm just so grateful that you agreed to come on. And, we went a little over time, but it was such a great conversation. I think you and I could continue on and on, but I want to be somewhat mindful for those who, are kind of hanging on. And, but, how do people get to know more about, your work and contact you? What are the best ways for people to do that?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter.
Great.
I'm not like incredibly active, but I am working on something that's really cool that I can't wait to share.
Great.
So that's where I'll share those things. And I'm Molly Bloom, pretty easy to find. And then, yeah. That's
awesome. That's fantastic. For everyone listening, we will be sending you a few things in the next day or two, emails with information, with a recording of this, but also information on the Last 8% Morning podcast, which is a podcast that integrates, it's a walking mindfulness podcast of movement, mindfulness, and mental training exercises, a way to build that practice. If you struggle with sitting meditation, which many people who both of us work with do, walking mindfulness has the same effects in terms of affecting the brain. So we'll send that to you.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So we'll send, a whole bunch of other materials, but honestly, Molly, I just know that people are going to be served, and that just makes me so happy. I've just so enjoyed the conversation, and, I'm just excited to know kind of what's next on the horizon. It sounds like some exciting things. And so thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate from all of us at IWHP.
Well, thank you for what you do, JP, in the world. It's talk about serving.
Well, thank you so much. All right.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely our pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a wonderful day.
Okay.